Hi, this is Julie, and I'm on a quest in Season 3 to bring the podcast to more women. So as you're listening, I'd love it if you'd identify one mother you think could benefit from this conversation and make a commitment to share it with her. That, I know, is how we'll grow this community of like-minded mothers on a quest. Hi, and welcome to Mother's Quest, a podcast for moms like me ready to live our own truly epic life. I'm Julie Neal, a life and leadership coach, community builder, writer, and mom to two high-energy boys who challenge me to grow into my best self. I'll be right there. Where was I? In the months leading up to a big milestone birthday, I decided it was time to stop sidelining my dreams and realize that I'm the hero of my own journey. I knew I didn't want to do it alone, so I created this podcast to learn from other moms on their own quest, so their words of wisdom and lessons learned could help light the way for mine. I created this podcast for myself. Come along with me, and you'll find some treasures of your own. Hello and welcome to this episode number 36 and this first of season 3 of the Mother's Quest podcast. If you had a chance to tune into the bonus episode I released last week, Sprouting Seeds for Mother's Quest, you know that today's episode marks what feels like a new chapter with the podcast and with what I call my epic life. If not, I'll link that episode in the show notes and I encourage you to tune in. Through that episode, I reflected on the growth that's happened in my life over the last year, and also the places where I want to focus or deepen new learning. One area where I want to grow is in conquering limiting beliefs, fear of failure, and over-analysis, and instead step forward with more freedom, authenticity, and in a place of flow. I couldn't ask for a better guide to kick off the season with this mindset and to lead the way for all of us than Karly Nimmo. Karly is a #1 iTunes podcaster with her 2 hit shows, Karlosophies and Keeping Good Company, which she launched with her best friend, Lisa Corduff. She's a serial entrepreneur, mad creator, born communicator, and killer storyteller, with a knack for getting you to look at life from a different perspective. After finding herself hooked up to an ECG, having a suspected heart attack, Karly took a good hard look at what was really important to her, and found it wasn't all the trimmings. It was really quite simple. She wanted to slow down, spend time with family and friends, do work that she really cares about. On the work front, she started to let things go, one by one, until 2 things were left: speak, write. And that's what you'll find her doing today. Another woman who powerfully speaks and writes, and whose episode on Karly's new podcast supported me in moving through some recent fear of speaking out myself, is Samantha Nolan Smith. I knew I needed a special person to dedicate Karly's episode, and I'm so grateful that Samantha said yes. Here she is.
Thank you, Julie. I'm thrilled to be able to dedicate this episode of the podcast. Karly and I have known each other for a number of years through online business communities, and I love Karly for lots of reasons, but one of them is that she is so upfront and authentic and truthful about her own journey, about the difficulties of facing her own fears, of looking at hard truths and working through those. And I really admire her willingness to share that journey and that process openly. And when I thought about this topic of moving from fear into flow, I decided I wanted to dedicate this episode to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women of Australia. The mothers in particular who had their children stolen from them over a 65 to 70 year period in the 20th century. As a mother, I can't imagine anything worse than having had your children taken from you. And of course, each country has its own history that it needs to come to grips with, it needs to come to peace with. Histories that are both painful and violent, and glorious and extraordinary. In my work, I support women to be seen and heard in the world. And I truly believe that the more that we share these painful truths and the more that we have the courage to sit and be still and listen to the pain that people are carrying deep within themselves, then the greater the hope we all have to move forward in harmony together. So to you, Julie, thank you for creating this beautiful space for mothers to come together. To you, Karly, thank you for being a shining light when it comes to facing your fears and being openly transparent about your journey. And to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women of Australia, I am deeply sorry for what the non-Indigenous people of this country have done to you, to your families, to your land, to your law, to your languages, to your people. I know the healing power of being seen and heard. And so I hope that this dedication is one small step toward a new and different future for us all.
Thank you, Samantha, for this powerful dedication to the Indigenous mothers of Australia and for your reflection of the courage and truth-telling you've experienced from Karly. In this episode, Karly and I talk about the ways that she's come through for me, helping me find my own truths. First, when I was moving through uncertainty in the launch of the podcast, and later when I learned I hadn't pressed record on an interview with Karly and Podcast Hall of Famer Elsie Escobar. The resulting lesson from Karly on letting go, quantum physics, and neural pathways thankfully was recorded, and you can download it if you'd like to listen. And it made that mistake I made that day priceless in the lesson it helped me learn. Karly shares about her own epic life, how she got to where she is now, living in a state of authenticity, doing what feels like her true purpose. And she gives us two powerful challenges. The first, to identify foundational commitments we can make to ourselves each day. And the second, to explore how to go after doing our best work from a place of flow. I hope you leave this conversation inspired as I did to trust yourself and the mistakes that happen in your life to bring you closer to the fullest expression of who you are and to your authentic purpose. I'm Julie Neal, and this is Mother's Quest. Karly Nimmo, welcome to the Mother's Quest podcast, the first episode of season 3. I'm so excited to have you here.
I'm pretty excited to be here.
Before we dive into your story and your wisdom, I love to reflect on how I became connected with you and why I wanted to have you on the podcast.
Cool.
So I'm jumping to the acknowledgements a little early. I'll do acknowledgements again later, but you have been a pivotal person for me in my podcasting journey. And in this moment where I've celebrated a full year of podcasting, and I'm getting ready to move into whatever this next chapter of podcasting is, I feel so appreciative that you came into my life when you did. I don't know if the podcast would have been born without your support. And you've come in with just amazing guidance and wisdom and grounding at different points for me. And so as I'm getting ready to start this new season, it just felt right to have you on to honor your contribution to Mother's Quest and setting the tone and intention setting for what this season can be with your support.
Cool. I've been totally honored to be part of the journey, and I've loved watching you blossom over the past year. It's been an incredible journey to watch. So thank you for honoring yourself and moving through all that fear and resistance to get here.
So there are two things I want to note and name that were real gifts that you gave me. The first, as I was developing the podcast, well, of course, you helped me with so many nuts and bolts that I don't know how I would have done it without you. But more important than that, I did, as you mentioned, have a lot of resistance at the time and a lot of doubt about like, when should I launch? And I don't know if I can have it ready yet. And then at one point I realized I wasn't going to be able to launch when I originally planned. And I was thinking about launching in December. And I was worried that, oh, maybe nobody is listening in December. And I remember asking you, what do you think I should do? Do you remember what you said?
No, but I can imagine. I can imagine it wasn't very tactful.
So I don't remember the words exactly, and you probably did say it in your signature style. But I mean, essentially, you were like, every time is the right time, or any time that feels right to you is the right time, and do it. And I felt like it was just this little bit of a green light and encouragement. At the end of the day, it wasn't you giving me permission, it was you allowing me to give myself permission to do what felt right. And especially to follow like no preset timeline of what I thought should happen, but what just actually felt like the right timing. Like it was the right timing when I was ready and able to do it. And I ended up launching on my birthday as a birthday present to myself. And of course, in retrospect, like that was such a brilliant time because now it has so much meaning when my birthday comes for myself, but also this journey that I've been on. That was the first major gift you gave me.
I like that one.
Yeah. Anything else you want to say about that?
Well, yes, always. Honestly, I just see so many people holding themselves back from starting things, waiting for the right conditions, waiting until they have enough or they are enough. And like I said to you, really there is no right time, only the time. And, done is better than perfect, always.
Yes. And then the second blessing that you gave me, you and Elsie Escobar of She Podcasts and the Lipson podcast, we had an interview together that I did that I was expecting to share in season 2. And at the end of what was a really powerful, wonderful conversation between the three of us, I realized that I had not pressed record. And at the time, Elsie was somebody who I was, now I feel like I've established a really strong connection with her. But at the time, I didn't know her that well. And I knew you well, but I knew she was in the middle of a lot of things. And time was really valuable in that moment. And dealing with the fact that I had not recorded that conversation initially hit me really hard. And Elsie, had to go and tend to her girls. And you were still there on the phone with me where I was able to say, oh my God, Karly, I can't believe I just did that. And, starting to go down a path of like really beating myself up. And you came on with just, again, like so much grounded wisdom that really changed my thought pattern immediately and for that whole night. And it's something that I now really carry with me. What do you remember about that and what you shared with me then?
I remember the moment when you realized that you hadn't hit record, and I could just feel you standing on the edge of like a shit spiral. And I knew instantly how you were feeling because I felt that myself, like I've been in that place where I've just totally beaten myself up for things that were really beyond control, but also, everything happens for a reason. There was good reason why you didn't hit record. We didn't understand it at the time, but I think you do now, right?
I do. Yeah. So, it turned out that Elsie at the time wasn't able to re-record. And so we didn't do my original vision for that episode, which was really more about podcaster. It was like you were both a panel of podcasters. But instead, Elsie got nominated to be inducted into the Podcasting Hall of Fame. And she really wanted to have conversations on other people's podcasts about the impact of podcasting beyond downloads and really the true power of it, in preparation for sharing, her story and her platform before she was going to accept this award. And so then I invited her to come and have that conversation. And it was really powerful and important. And I've since shared it with so many podcasters who I think have really valued it. And that conversation never would have happened in that, almost divine timing that it did had we released our episode.
Yeah. And I mean, so much has shifted then for both Elsie and I. She's really stepped up and moved into this advocacy kind of role. And I've moved away from my role as a podcast teacher and mentor. So it couldn't have been better, really.
Right, right. And
She got to share her message, which is so much more important than, I mean, we had a brilliant conversation together, but your conversation with Elsie and your conversation with me, I think, is going to have a bigger impact than the conversation that we'd had at the time. I mean, trust is just such a big thing, right? Like, we have to trust that. A friend of mine had said to me last year, while my life was falling apart, everything is happening for you, not to you. And for me, that's really shifted my perspective on things, because I understand now that when things go wrong, it's not happening to me. It's happening for a greater purpose that sometimes I don't understand, and sometimes it's painful and yuck stuff. Yeah, we just have to trust. And that's exhausting sometimes.
Well, and it is helpful when you have a sounding board like you were for me that day to help me see that and have faith. And I really did. So in almost an instant after you helped share that, and I think you also shared about a book you were reading at the time that related to this, and I'll put it in the show notes. And I know we're going to include a little clip of our original conversation too, but almost immediately my whole demeanor changed. And in the past, I would have gone to bed that night beating myself up about it. I would have woken up with that horrible feeling of remembering, the stupid thing I did the day before. And I really didn't. I totally let it go. I really trusted, well, okay. Wasn't what I was expecting, but I think there's something that is meant to be from this. And it almost felt like even the conversation you and I had was so powerful and something that I remember to this day. That was a gift that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't made that mistake. And in fact, there's a particular excerpt of that I was listening to yesterday where you talked about neural pathways in our brain. And I was explaining to you that I had had a really powerful day in my new life with my Mother's Quest venture. The day that we did that interview, I had Kathleen Shannon in my Facebook group doing a Facebook Live following my episode with her on the podcast. She's from the Being Boss podcast and was a mentor and somebody who I listened to in the early days when I was first developing this venture. So having her in my group in this way was so powerful. And I think there was something else that had happened that day. And I felt like I was handling it all really well and had stepped up in ways that felt scary, but I was like really making it all happen. And so then I said to you that right before our interview, I had this feeling like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm really doing all of this. Am I going to be able to also have this podcast interview now? And I felt like I had almost jinxed myself in some way. And tell me a little bit about what you learned about the neural pathways and what you shared with me then about that.
Gosh, I don't even remember. I mean, I know I talk a bit about neural pathways because so often we just aren't even conscious of why we react or behave in certain ways. And it's really just that, we have these pathways in our brain that are so downtrodden from too much travel that sometimes we have to short them, and the only way to short them is to become aware of them. So what did I say about them to you?
Yeah. So you exactly what you were just describing. You were saying that some of my old patterns of thinking may have been almost this self-sabotaging thought of I can't handle it all. And somehow maybe in that situation then presented itself. But us being able to do that debrief and raising my awareness about the whole thing, and then also trusting that with that mistake, it was okay. I would realize it would all work out, that somehow now I was kind of creating a new pathway, a new and much more powerful one of not only realizing that, okay, I actually really can handle this, but also even if I make a mistake or it doesn't turn out exactly the way I thought it could, I can handle that too.
Yeah, totally. I think what that's about, right, is, and this is something that I've been working on myself recently, is that, expanding your capacity for good. Often we have this self-imposed limit of what we're willing to receive or allow before we do trip into going down unconsciously down one of those pathways that stop us from overfilling our bucket of good, And I've been trying to work on that myself at the moment, allowing myself to feel more pleasure and just allow more, create a bigger container than I'd previously had. And that can only happen through self-awareness, right? We have to be willing to look at what our limits are and take responsibility for when perhaps we unconsciously do things to derail our good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I am looking forward to hearing even more about this. I know I've been, following some of the changes that have been happening in your life, and it really does feel like you've been expanding your bucket for all of these good things. I want to ask you the question that I ask every guest first before we dive into the epic guideposts and hear more about what you've been creating in your life, which is tell me a little bit about your own childhood and the impact that your mother had on you.
My mother is just wonderful human being, but if there is a but, she spent her life as a peacekeeper, I guess, as trying to make sure that everyone else was happy. And in that, not putting herself in that equation. So I guess maybe she found her happiness by making sure we were all fed and clothed and loved and not hurting. She's just a really nurturing mother kind of person. And that's awesome. Like, that's who she is. But for me, she also just took care of my father. It was a traditional kind of marriage where mum did all the cooking. Our dad did the cleaning because that was his profession. He was a cleaner and he likes to keep things very neat and tidy. But mum would serve dad first. She would make his sandwich, make sure he had his lunch and his cup of tea before us. So dad's needs were always first, and they still are today. So that can be a little confronting as a kid and as an adult. Like, it still triggers me. I'm like, Dad, get your own bloody cup of tea. Like, mum's not your slave kind of thing. And I don't think my dad expects, well, I think he's just come to expect it because that's the way it's always been. It's not his shortcomings or even my mother's. It's just their status quo. And for me, I never wanted that to be my status quo. I've always felt duty and responsibility weigh very heavily on me. And so I didn't want to have children. I didn't want to be a slave to a man. I wanted to be fiercely independent. And so, yeah, that really shaped who I am.
And how would you say that impacted the path that you're on in your own life and what you're on a quest for these days?
Well, definitely impacted me on the way that I've been a lone wolf a lot of my life. Even in partnerships, I've been the rock, the person that gets the ship done, the person that drives the ship, the person in control. Really, in the last year or so, that has just come to the surface in a big way. And I've realized that I can't be driving the ship all the time. I can't be right all the time. It's exhausting. And I can't control how or why things come to me. So about this time last year, I was in a pretty dark place and had a bit of a meltdown or a breakdown, I guess you would call it. I thought I was having a heart attack, and I was actually, thankfully, having an anxiety attack. Just about where my life was. At almost 40, I thought I would be somewhere different from where I was. I thought, like, after being an entrepreneur all my life, I'm a savvy businesswoman and I was broke. And I just was beating myself up for that. How is this possible? How is it possible that you are renting a house, raising a toddler, not broke, with very little super? How did you get here? And I just had got to this point where I just had to let go of all the expectations that I'd been placing on myself, all the responsibility, and just, instead of being the strong rock, I just allowed myself to crumble a bit. And that was nice. So I guess in that way, I came back a little to my mum and found my femininity again, my softness. I mean, I've always allowed myself to be vulnerable. I'm very truthful and honest, often sometimes to my own detriment. But I hadn't allowed myself to be soft. I was waiting for someone to save me, but I was never allowing, anyone to even help me up off the ground.
Wow.
So that kind of all unfolded over the course of about 12 months, where my life just started crumbling and crumbling and crumbling and crumbling. And I just got to the point where I was like, you know what? None of this really matters. Why are you trying to strive so hard for something that doesn't actually live externally from you? It's within. You don't need the expensive house to prove to people anything. You don't need to be making a shitload of money. It's nice for sure and definitely open to it, but it's not defining your worth as a human being. What you do doesn't even really define your worth as a human being. And just with that realization that really, and this sounds depressing, but it's absolutely not depressing and incredibly liberating, is that nothing really matters. So from that place, and I think it was really born because I went home to visit my parents and it was a trip that was going to save me. So I was going down there to do some public speaking and I thought, well, if I can get there and I can sign up 1 or 2 clients, then it'll pay for itself and it's all good. Of course, didn't sign up any clients, was totally broke and was walking through the streets of Melbourne. And at the time, there was homeless tent cities had kind of been shut down and all the homeless people had moved into the actual city of Melbourne. And I was walking around with a girlfriend and I saw all these homeless people lying in doorways of shops. And instead of me being filled with pity for these people, which I definitely would have in the past, what I realized was I could do that. Like if things got that bad, I would still be living, I would still be breathing. Mm-hmm. I would still be supported, just not in the way I had been expecting it to look, you know? And with that just came a huge amount of freedom. Instead of having to make shit happen, I was just allowing shit to happen. And yeah, it's been working for me.
I appreciate so much, you mentioned that you are vulnerable and you have, been very open about your journey and even this breakdown, which really seemed like it was a breakthrough. You do these, you call them free flow conversations on your podcast, Karlosophies. And I feel like I distinctly remember one of those episodes when you were on the beach and going through this process. So I know that you're helping, me and so many other people in being honest about, what you're learning along the way on this journey. Really grateful for that too.
And that can be hard too, right? Because we are emotional beings. And I feel like a lot of the time we're taught that that's wrong, that there's something wrong with us feeling emotions and to hide from feelings like shame and guilt. But like it's a full spectrum and we have to be able to feel all of it. We have to be able to allow ourselves the permission to feel all of it. And so for me, those free flows represent me sharing all of me, not hiding aspects, because there's just so much freedom in that, not just for me, but for the people who listen, because they're like, oh, I can't tell you how many people say, oh my God, I thought I was alone in that.
Right.
And we're just never alone. We just think we are. And often we've isolated ourselves because of the shame and because of the guilt and because we're not supposed to feel these, big emotions. But yeah, part of my process has really been about embracing all of me, even the really ugly stuff. And I've struggled more with owning the really brilliant stuff about me. So that's my work at the moment, is that, the capacity for good and the capacity for me to own my own innate value.
We're going to move now into exploring what I call the epic guideposts. And this is based on the premise of Mother's Quest is that as mothers, we are, wanting our children to realize their dreams and potential, but that we really need to be pursuing the lives that are meaningful and that feel epic, where we're really the author of our story, if we want to show our children by our example how to live that kind of a life. And so I want to ask you about these different guideposts. EPIC also is an acronym mnemonic for the guideposts that help us live that life while we're raising our children. And the first guidepost, E, stands for engaged, and it's about being engaged mindfully with our children. And I'd love to hear a little bit of your daughter, your relationship with her, and especially how you've been able to engage mindfully with her since you've gone through this process of kind of stripping away all these things that don't matter. I'm curious what has shifted in your relationship with her.
Yeah, so firstly, the engage thing, I give myself permission to honor myself first. She's in daycare. She's in a beautiful family daycare. She started there when she was about 14 or 15 months old. And it was a real challenge for me to do that because my motherhood for me meant sacrifice. And sure, there are sacrifices that I've made, but I can't be the sacrifice, if that makes sense. So for me, when it comes to engaging mindfully, it means being mindful. So I will always honor myself first. If I need time out, I will take time out. Whatever allows me, whatever gives me the space to be able to be present with her when I'm with her. And sometimes I'm not great at that. Sometimes I'm distracted, emails are pinging through, there's some kind of, disaster I've got to deal with, or some accident I've got to mop up at work, in a work situation, and it distracts from her. But I try to be actively engaged with her, particularly when she's going through big emotional stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So with my mum, the negative feelings were something that you fixed how somebody else was feeling. But for me, with Mabel, I'm really about giving her the space to feel through them and honoring her too in that process. So a few weeks ago, she had a really horrible nightmare and she just couldn't sleep in her own room. So she's been sleeping with me the last few weeks, and she's been as clingy as a koala. She can't be out of sight from me when she's at home. And I've been just honoring that. When she feels safe, she will uncling. And in the meantime, I'll just be there to hold the space. I want her to understand that she's safe and that I'm here for her, but also give her enough space to be able to process her own emotions and not be triggered by them myself, not to allow my own feelings about her feelings get in the way of her moving through her stuff.
Wow.
So I guess that's E.
That's a powerful gift. And have you noticed anything shift in your ability to be present or to hold that space for her to have her own feelings since you've had this recent process yourself?
Yeah, definitely. And I also, I do talk to her about them. So this morning I'm sitting in my mother-in-law's spare room because my front yard is being digged up by council. So there's trucks and rollers and diggers, and it's like constant noise is something that really triggers my anxiety. I just can't cope if I can't hear myself think. And then add to that a clingy, almost 4-year-old. It can be challenging, but I think I did quite well. And I speak to her about it. So this morning I said to her, look, Mummy's feeling very nervous and anxious today. And she understands that. And so she gives me space too for me to be able to process my own stuff. So it's reciprocal. And I feel like our kids are often just a total reflection of ourselves. In fact, I know they are. So when she's going through this stuff, I also look internally for what's going on with me. Is she reflecting to me guilt about possibly thinking about going off on retreat or something? Like, what is it within me that she's reflecting? So yeah.
You're transitioning to the next guidepost because I do want to hear more about the work that you are doing now. And I know that retreats and masterminds are at the forefront. But tell me about the guidepost P in your life right now. P stands for passionate and purposeful. And it's about the impact that you're making beyond your family. How is that manifesting in your life right now?
So this is something that I have really struggled with over the years. I think the reason emotions are so important to me is because, I have a history with depression. Depression for me has been the ultimate in suppression of emotions. So now that I have them, I honor them and I embrace them. In that space, it's really hard to know what you're passionate about because you don't even really know what the feeling of passion is. And purpose, I feel like purpose is often, for me anyway, it was this big grey cloud that was following me around all the time. What is your purpose? What are you here for? What are you supposed to be doing with your life? It just always felt like it was the next thing I would find would be my purpose. And there's been so many iterations of it. I thought being a voiceover artist was my purpose. I thought being a co-working space owner was my purpose. I thought, I had a brief interlude where I was doing kind of coaching. And so that was my purpose. And then Radcasters was my purpose. And my podcast was my purpose. And this is what I've learned about purpose is it's constantly in a state of flux because it is who you are. Like you can't not be on purpose because your purpose is you living. So in terms of the way that I show up now towards my passions, I guess, I try to do everything on purpose with intention, consciously. And that's work in progress for sure. But, the passion thing is the thing that I've struggled with because it's just been, I guess, allowing myself the permission to really go all in on the things that I'm passionate about or even just acknowledge that there's passion there. That sounds really probably odd, but I think I've been so afraid of actually being really brilliant at something, that I've played a small game. And this year, I'm really stepping things up. And, I've written this first draft of a book. It's not the book that I'll publish, but I needed to write it for me. I needed to get it out of my head and process all the things that I've been through in my life. And it'll form part of my book. So my writing is something that I'm really passionate about, and I'm definitely going to be honouring way more this year. And, these conversations are where it's at for me. This is what I'm passionate about, sharing my truth. And for a long time, I denied that for myself because it just didn't make any entrepreneurial sense, How do I monetize that kind of thing? And right now I'm just giving myself permission to do it anyway, whether it's monetized or not. And then I've just really, in the last, 6 to 9 months, have been exploring these ideas that I've had for a long time that I didn't start because I was so afraid of failing. So the retreat, I've thrown huge parties, a $100,000 co-working space party that no one came to. And it's kind of been a story of my life. So I got into this space where I stopped kind of throwing the parties. But recently I've been moving into exploring these, and retreats were one of them. A mastermind. I actually ran a mastermind about 4 or 5 years ago, which was a resounding failure. So I was quite nervous about running it again. But it was about collaboration, this one. So, I don't have to be a lone wolf. I can do this stuff with other people. In fact, I want to do it with other people. So I've just found the mastermind has been amazing. We'll be running it again this year, myself and my best mate, Lisa Corduff. And then the retreats. That was just like a homecoming for me.
Wow.
It was the most incredible thing. I put, a Facebook post up in my group and filled it on the spot. And nothing like that has really ever happened to me. It was so validating and so lovely. And I have no doubt that it's due to the fact that I've, increased that capacity for good, and that I wasn't attached to anyone coming. I decided if one person wanted to come, we'd just hire a hotel room. And if 10 people wanted to come, I'd go and get a really lovely house. And 10 came. Yeah, so I'll definitely be doing more of that, doing the things that I've thought about for a long time, but haven't acted on due to fear. Because it always pays off. Even when it doesn't work out, it works out.
And tell me a little bit about the thread of collaboration and realizing that you don't have to do these things alone, being more sort of open and softening to help from others. How is that also showing up in your new podcast, the one that you're doing with your best friend?
Yeah, so the one I'm doing with Lisa, that has really just been something that we talked about doing for a long time. So was the mastermind. And it's a glimpse into behind the scenes as to how our friendship works. The whole concept of it is keeping good company. What does it take to foster these really deep, strong bonds with people? And so we do lift the lid on some of our shortcomings and some of the things that we've struggled with in our relationship together, to talk about them with our audience, which can be interesting because, nobody wants to be exposed for the areas where they lack, but the purpose of that is really just in, giving people permission to do things their own way. Lisa and I are both very, very, very different people. We have very different approaches. We're driven by very different motivations. And we do things very, very differently. She's a valedictorian student who was offered a master's at university scholarship kind of thing. And I was always the terrible student who needed to make the mistakes herself to learn the lessons. So we can trigger each other big time, because I remind her that sometimes it's good to do things just from your intuition. And she reminds me sometimes that you can follow someone else's guidelines.
It sounds like you balance each other well.
Yeah, often. And like any relationship like that where you are really brutally honest, there are ups and downs, and there are times where you become so close to each other that it's almost like a sister relationship. And hopefully, I haven't got any sisters, but I've got brothers, and I know that we can really call each other out on stuff because we're not afraid of losing them. And that's the kind of relationship I have with her. So it is a blessing, and sometimes hugely triggering.
Yeah, just full of powerful emotion all around.
Yeah.
Well, I want to move us to the next guidepost, which is I, and that stands for invested. And this is about being invested in yourself, about
Mhm.
self-care, about your commitment to your own growth and learning, and to giving yourself the things that really feed and fulfill you. What are you learning or what are you finding about the things that are really nurturing you right now?
Water, all about water. And again, that space, like just giving myself space. So I have Mabel in daycare for 3 days a week and I have business to run. I create 2 podcasts. I do the mastermind. There's writing in there. There's a lot of stuff that I can do in my 17 hours of daycare a week. But I always prioritize at least the first 2 hours of the day to me.
Mm.
And I go for a big, long beach walk with my dog. And then I'll go and I'll stop at my local health food shop and get myself a green juice or a piece of raw cheesecake or something, just something that honors me. And then I'll come back and start my day. And on top of that, it's, for me, it's about spending time in water, whether that is, just before this podcast, I'd been feeling really anxious because of all the noise that was going on at home and came up and just gave myself permission to go and jump and swim in the pool for half an hour before I jumped on this call because I knew it would calm me down.
Yeah.
And so I just honor myself. And you know what? This started with a really good friend of mine who told me, like, basically that our life, our emotional well-being it's like a house, but we have to have foundational stuff going on in that house for it to be solid. And so she asked me, what are 5 foundational things that I can do to give me that solid base so that I don't, that I do when I'm in a really good place, that I can come back to when things get hard to make sure that I have that solid foundation. And the first thing that came up was making my bed. And so that was over 2 years ago now. And every single day for those 2 years, I have made my bed. Before that, I would have been lucky to make my bed, God, I don't know, when friends came over.
Right.
But it's a foundational honoring of self for me. And that is so important. If I don't prioritize myself, no one else is going to.
Right.
And no one is going to get my best work. So in me honoring myself, in me taking that time out, I could, and I've guilted myself into, you really, all the money stuff was going on. Why are you walking on the beach? You should be hustling to get more money in the door, blah, 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 blah. I was hustling like a maniac. And if I didn't take that time out for me, and I didn't for a while, I'm no good to anyone. For me, it's about giving myself space, knowing where I feel good, and just allowing myself to be in that.
Yeah. Oh, I love that so much. And I love the metaphor and what a great exercise for me to do and others as well to take that time to think about like what could be 5 foundational things.
And it's simple stuff, right? Like my list was, this is when Mabel was not sleeping. She was sleeping like 45 minutes consecutively. I was broken and exhausted. And the things were simple. It was like, have a cup of tea. It wasn't big stuff.
Yeah.
Do some journaling. Get outside and sit on the ground. Go to the beach for a walk and make my bed. But the make the bed thing was really foundational because I work from home. I go to the toilet in my bathroom, I don't know, 8 times a day. And every time I see my bed, it's a reminder you care about you. It's just a reminder that I respect myself. And that's really powerful.
Wow. This is really good. Well, we're going to get to the part of this conversation soon where you give us a challenge, but I might already be accepting this challenge. 5 foundational commitments to myself.
Yeah.
Sounds like
that sounds like a good one.
Yeah.
I knew it would arrive.
Well, the last guidepost, C, stands for connected. And this is about building all those relationships in your life so that you are in community on your epic life journey. You've already mentioned some of your connections, but what are the ways in which you think about this guidepost in your life?
Connection is one of my highest values, and it's actually one that I often struggle with. I have Lisa, but Lisa lives 2,000 kilometers away from me. So we have, more a a phone friendship than being able to just drop in and have a cup of tea. And I kind of miss that. I miss that community, if that makes sense. Like I'm surrounded by
surroundings.
Yeah. Like I'm surrounded by a really strong network of women online, and I am here too, but I just don't plug in as much. So that has been, I just connected with a beautiful friend of mine, Sora, yesterday, who's actually over here from the States at the moment. And, spent a couple of hours just chatting with her. And there's nothing like a real life hug,
Yeah.
And she is staying with another mutual friend of ours, Shara, who I just absolutely adore. But I just haven't made the time to connect with her more often. And I think, that'll be a big part of my year this year too, is connecting in person, which is why the retreats are so amazing for me, because it's like deep connection in person, lots of hugs for a couple of days. I do have support locally. My husband's mum's here and she helps out a lot with Mabel, and my husband is incredibly supportive, but I just definitely need more girl time. And that's one thing I think. It's easy for me to prioritize myself during work time, but sometimes it's hard for me to prioritize myself during family time. If it's going to impact on family time, then often I'll not take the offer of going to the movies with a girlfriend, because I feel guilty for, I'm not going to be there to put Mabel to bed and it's going to fall on Miko's shoulder. And I think that's where my mother's guilt shows up. But connection is really, really important. And I think it's difficult too, because, actually tomorrow night we're going with a couple friend of ours that we've known for many, many years. It's how the friends that we met through, Michael and I met. And we're going to see Foo Fighters. I want to be doing more than that, not just connecting with girlfriends for coffee dates, but also connecting and going to see a rock band if I feel like it. Stuff that expresses all different parts of me and gives me fixes, because I find that, back in the day, I was a party animal and I drank a lot and, went to a lot of gigs and took drugs and did all that kind of jazz. And so now my friends are so much more spiritual and they don't drink. They're just very different to the friends that I have from my old life. And so sometimes bringing those two together is difficult. So, expecting Miko to come or be part of a thing where it's all just my girlfriends who are having deep and meaningful conversations. It's not really fun for him. So it has to be separate from him. But then I also want to make sure that there's enough time for us and our relationship. So that's the kind of weird tightrope that I walk on sometimes.
Yeah. And it sounds like, of the guideposts for where you are in your life in this moment, this is one that needs maybe a little bit more nurturing and attention. There's always one, at least.
Yeah, totally.
Well, the next thing we're going to do before we move to acknowledgements, we're almost at the close of our conversation. I want to ask you about a moment in your life recently that's something that I call an epic snapshot moment. And these are those moments where it feels like time slows down, or maybe you're seeing things almost in like vivid technicolor and you're realizing, oh my goodness, this is everything I've been wanting. The kind of moments that you can in a second kind of transport yourself back to. It's left such a permanent mark. I'm wondering what recently is one of those moments for you?
I think I've had two in the last week, actually. One was just very simply me floating in the pool. And because I'm growing very ungracefully grey right now. I have bright red dyed hair and I'm just over the constant dyeings. Yeah. But what the dyeing has meant was that, I haven't been able to swim underwater because it all bleeds and it fades and it's expensive. And, so I haven't been floating with my hair in the water for a long time. And I've really desperately missed it, which is why I'm allowing myself to go grey. But I found myself I knew that I was going to the hairdresser the next day, so I just allowed myself to float in the water. And while I was lying there, I just had this feeling of being, fully supported. The ocean, the water, like I'm just lying there and the water is holding me up. And I just felt so clear and relaxed and calm. And there was just this deep, sense of knowing that we're all supported. We just don't necessarily feel that way sometimes, or we don't allow ourselves to be or feel that way.
Wow.
So that was one. It was just really profound for me and so simple, right? Like I think sometimes we think these things need to be like a huge lightning bolt, and sometimes it can just be a moment in the shower or with that cup of tea, or we make the bed and we're like, man, that was good. That looks good. I did a good job. And then the other moment on Wednesday, a friend of mine, Krista Jane, was running a day retreat. I rarely do things like this, but I've worked with Krista before, and she's one person that I really trust to take me places. And what highlighted it was a day of connection with other women, meditation, and things that took me outside of my comfort zone, with that, like dancing with a blindfold on and stuff like that. Stuff that I really despise doing, but also love. We rarely let it all go. It's so hard to do that. And that was one of those days taken outside of my comfort zone and did some things and found stillness and found clarity. And the clarity was really that I'm exactly where I need to be. I'm doing exactly what I want to be doing with my life. And that was just so amazing. It was such an amazing feeling. It was like a knowing. Yeah, and just real clarity, which is what I went there searching for. I've had so much stuff going on, with writing, and I wasn't sure if I was writing this book or not, or, and just to have supreme clarity around what I'm here for, what I'm doing, and who I am, and that I am in exactly the right place. I'm on the right path was just, totally epic.
I absolutely love this metaphor of you floating in the water and what that has meant. And I feel like it connects to all of these different threads of the story that you've been sharing, just coming together about letting go and being held, and just really beautiful.
Yeah, because sometimes it's just amazing to think that we're a human being and there's this force of gravity that's keeping us stuck to this planet that's floating through space. It's like, it's just mind blowing. When you have that kind of perspective, the little stuff doesn't matter so much, right? It doesn't matter that you didn't press record on a podcast interview, or you sent an email to a client and it was probably a little bit emotional than it should have been. That stuff doesn't matter when you realize, even though this sounds depressing again, how insignificant you really are and how powerful that is. And and there's freedom in that, big time.
So I want to ask you now, before we close with acknowledgements, what challenge or offering do you want to give to me? And I feel like I've sort of already selected one around, identifying these 5 foundations that can become a solid base. But I'm wondering what else, knowing that this conversation is sort of setting the tone for season 3 and whatever this next chapter of my mother's quest and my epic life looks like for me. What would you want to offer me in a way of challenge as I'm on the precipice of all of that?
Awesome. Amazing. So while I was at that retreat last Wednesday, the girl running it, Krista Jane, asked a question that just blew my mind in its simplicity and in its power. And that question is, and I offer it to you, are you doing your best work? For me, the answer was yes, in part. Yes, I am, but I'm not going all in on it. And for me, that time is now to go all in, to do my best work, and not in a pressure-filled way, in a light, joyful, playful way. So I guess that's the question that I want to offer to you and your community is, are you doing your best work? And if so, amazing. Take a moment to really celebrate that. And if not, time for some self-exploration. What is your best work? And it's okay not to have the answer to that too. I think I've spent a very long time searching for that. But are you doing your best work?
Yeah. As the way I'm taking it in this moment where I am is, what is my best work? And how can this next body of work embody the best that I can do? And I like thinking about best, not in a tight perfectionist way,
Yes.
but like best meaning like in the highest good for myself and for
Yeah,
others.
absolutely. And for me, it's about full expression. That is my best work, when I'm fully expressing all parts of me, when I am allowing myself to float.
Right.
That is where my best work happens. That is where I am my best work. And so I guess that is also an invitation to think about something that you would like to go all in on, and go all in.
Yeah.
With the knowing that you are supported, and you're just floating. So what have you got to lose?
All right. I commit to doing that reflection, that reflective work, and inviting others to do it with me. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Well, I want to close with just some highlights of themes and things that I'm taking with me and that I just honor in terms of the gift that you are, Karly. I want to appreciate your full expression, your truth of all the parts of your life that you share, and the shiny moments and then the moments that feel really dark. But there's this hopefulness that you always have that I really keep plugging into, that things are just right as they are and things are happening just as they should be, when they should be, that we can strip away the things that don't matter and focus on the things that feel more filled with ease and that bring us joy. And this metaphor about just, like floating in the experience that we're having in our lives right now. So thank you for that. I'm going to be carrying this message of best, but in an ease-filled way as I start this new season.
Yeah, best without attachment, which is a practice in itself.
Yeah. What are you taking away from this conversation?
I guess like mine is really that this is my best work. When I show up and I share solely from a place not of service to others, but also like just full honoring myself. This is my best work. And when I do it without giving weight to that voice that used to plague me, it was always in the background going, you sound like an idiot. Shut up. Stop talking. And I've practiced quietening that voice down enough. And so, yeah, I guess that's what I'm taking from it, is that I already am doing what I'm here to do. And I think we all are. We all are. Sometimes we just can't see it from the position that we're standing. So it might be time to look at it from a different angle.
Yeah, that brings me back to what you shared earlier about your sense of purpose, is that our purpose is who we are.
Totally.
I feel like that is another amazing nugget of wisdom from you to end on.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming along with me on this episode of the Mother's Quest podcast. I hope this conversation sparked something that will help you live your epic life. If you'd like to get show notes and learn more about how to join the Mother's Quest community, head over to mothersquest.com. And while you're there, I would love it if you would follow the prompts to subscribe, leave a review on iTunes, and help us spread the word. I want to end with some words to light the way on your quest. Seize the day, love your people, honor your gifts. Until next time.